The blizzard hit so suddenly that Victoria Graves barely had time to realize she was about to die alone on the Colorado plains before the world turned white and merciless. She had been traveling from Denver to meet her brother in Fairplay, a mining town nestled in the mountains where he had supposedly struck it rich with a silver claim. The stagecoach had broken an axle 15 miles outside of town, and the driver, in his infinite stupidity, had suggested they wait for help rather than push forward on foot. Victoria, 23 years old and possessing more determination than sense, had decided to walk. The November afternoon had seemed mild enough, the year being 1882, and the weather patterns as unpredictable as ever in the high country. Now, 3 hours into her trek, she could barely see her gloved hands in front of her face. The wind screamed across the open ground, driving snow into every gap in her traveling coat. Her feet, encased in fashionable but wholly inadequate boots, had gone numb a mile back. She stumbled forward, knowing that to stop meant certain death, but having no idea if she was even walking in the right direction anymore. The dark shape materialized out of the white void like something conjured from a fever dream. At first, Victoria thought it was a boulder, but then it moved, and she realized it was a horse, and upon that horse sat a man bundled against the storm. "Help!" she tried to call out, but her voice was stolen by the wind. She waved her arms, nearly losing her balance in the process. The rider turned his mount toward her, and within moments he was close enough that she could see his face beneath the wide brim of his hat, wrapped in a thick scarf. His eyes, startlingly blue even in the whiteout conditions, widened at the sight of her. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" He shouted over the wind. "Stagecoach broke down," she managed through chattering teeth. "Walking to Fairplay." The man looked around at the swirling snow, then back at her. She could see him calculating, making some kind of decision. "You will not make it another mile in this. My cabin is close. You will have to ride with me." Victoria knew she should be afraid. Every cautionary tale she had ever heard warned against trusting strange men in isolated places. But the cold had seeped so deep into her bones that fear seemed like a luxury she could not afford. When he reached down to pull her up onto the horse, she grasped his arm without hesitation. The man was strong, lifting her as though she weighed nothing and settling her in front of him on the saddle. He wrapped his heavy coat around them both as much as possible, his arms forming a protective barrier on either side of her as he held the reins. The horse, a sturdy bay with a wise look in its eyes, needed little urging to head into the storm. Victoria had no sense of how long they rode. Time became meaningless in the white void, measured only by the rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid warmth of the stranger at her back. She found herself leaning against him, drawing heat from his body, too far gone to care about propriety. When the cabin finally emerged from the storm, it looked like salvation itself. Small and sturdy, built from thick logs with shuttered windows, it sat in a slight depression that offered some protection from the wind. The man guided his horse to a lean-to attached to the side of the structure, dismounting first before reaching up to help Victoria down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground. He caught her easily, swinging her up into his arms like a child. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "I doubt that," he replied, his voice calmer now that they were somewhat sheltered from the wind. He kicked open the cabin door and carried her inside, setting her gently in a chair near a cold fireplace. "Stay there. I need to see to my horse, then I will get a fire going." He was gone before Victoria could respond, disappearing back into the storm. She sat shivering in the chair, looking around the cabin in the dim light that filtered through the shutters. It was sparse but clean, containing a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and the fireplace before her. A rifle hung above the door, and various tools and gear were organized neatly along the walls. The man returned a few minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. He unwrapped the scarf from his face and removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair and strong, weathered features. He looked to be perhaps 30 years old, with the kind of face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. There was a scar along his jawline, thin and pale, but his eyes remained his most striking feature, that sharp blue that seemed to see right through her. "Dermott Foster," he said, moving to the fireplace and beginning to arrange kindling with practiced efficiency. "I work a small ranch about 2 miles south of here. I use this cabin during the winter months when I need to check on my stock in the northern pastures." "Victoria Graves," she replied, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. "From Philadelphia originally. I was traveling to meet my brother in Fairplay." Dermott struck a match and lit the kindling, carefully feeding small sticks into the growing flame. "Your brother is James Graves, the one with the claim near London Junction." Victoria felt a flutter of hope. "You know him." "I know of him. Fairplay is not so large that people do not talk." Dermott added larger pieces of wood to the fire, building it up until heat began to fill the small space. "He will be worried when the stage does not arrive." "If the stage driver had any sense, he would have told people we broke down and that I decided to walk," Victoria said, though she felt doubt creeping in even as she spoke. The driver had been half drunk and wholly incompetent. "Perhaps he will send someone to look for me." "Not in this storm." Dermott stood and turned to face her, his expression serious. "This will blow for at least a day, maybe 2. The mountains trap storms like this and hold them. No one will be out searching until it clears." The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was trapped in a small cabin with a complete stranger for at least a day, possibly longer. She studied Dermott's face, looking for signs of threat or ill intent, but found only concern. "I need to get you out of those wet clothes," Dermott said, and Victoria's eyes widened in alarm. He held up his hands quickly. "I will turn my back, but if you do not get warm and dry, you will catch pneumonia or worse. You are already showing signs of frostbite." Victoria looked down at her hands and saw that her fingers had taken on a waxy, pale appearance. Her feet, still numb inside her boots, were undoubtedly in similar condition. "I have extra shirts and pants," Dermott continued, moving to a trunk near the bed. "They will be too large for you, but they are dry and warm. There is a blanket you can wrap yourself in while your clothes dry by the fire." He pulled out clothing and set it on the bed, then turned his back to her, facing the wall. "I will not look. I promise you that." Victoria's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her coat, so cold and stiff that she could barely make them work. Her traveling dress was damp with melted snow, clinging to her skin unpleasantly. She managed to remove her coat and dress, standing in her undergarments and feeling utterly vulnerable. The shirt Dermott had provided was indeed enormous, hanging past her thighs. The pants required her to roll the waistband several times and the legs even more, but they were made of thick wool and blessedly warm. "You can look now," she said quietly. Dermott turned around, his eyes respectfully staying on her face. "Your feet," he said. "We need to warm them slowly. Sit back down." Victoria returned to the chair and Dermott knelt before her. He took her feet gently in his hands, examining them with a practiced eye. "Not too severe," he said. "But we need to be careful. This will hurt as feeling returns." He was right. As warmth from the fire and from his hands began to penetrate her frozen feet, pain bloomed like fire. Victoria bit her lip to keep from crying out, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts. I know it hurts, Dermott said softly, his hands never stopping their gentle massage. But it means the tissue is alive. That is good. You seem to know what you are doing, Victoria managed through gritted teeth. I have lived through enough Colorado winters to have learned a few hard lessons. Dermott continued working on her feet, his touch careful and professional. I lost part of a finger to frostbite my first winter in the territory. I was 19 and thought I knew everything. The mountains taught me otherwise. How long have you been here? Victoria asked, partly to distract herself from the pain. 11 years now. Came west from Kansas after the war. He glanced up at her. I was too young to fight, but old enough to see what it did to the men who returned, my father among them. When he died, I sold the farm and came out here looking for something different. Did you find it? Dermott smiled slightly, the expression transforming his serious face. I found hard work, harsh weather, and more freedom than I ever knew existed. So yes, I suppose I did. The pain in Victoria's feet was beginning to subside to a dull ache. Dermott wrapped them in a soft cloth and then settled her back in the chair with a thick blanket around her shoulders. He moved to the shelves and began pulling down supplies. I was not expecting company, but I have enough food for both of us, he said. Coffee, beans, some salt pork, cornmeal for Johnny cakes. Not fancy, but it will keep us fed until the storm passes. Victoria watched him work, moving around the small cabin with easy confidence. He set a pot of coffee on to boil and began preparing a simple meal. The mundane domesticity of it all felt surreal. Just hours ago, she had been certain she would die in the snow. Now she sat warm and relatively comfortable, watching a stranger prepare food for her as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Why did you come west? Dermott asked as he worked. Philadelphia to Colorado is not a small journey, especially for a woman alone. I am not usually alone, Victoria said. I was traveling with a woman from my church group, but she fell ill in Denver and decided to return home. I chose to continue because my brother has been urging me to visit for over a year. He claims Fairplay is a town with opportunity and that I might find work there as a teacher. You are a teacher. I was, back in Philadelphia. I taught at a school for girls. Victoria pulled the blanket tighter around herself. But the school closed last year and work has been scarce. When James wrote suggesting I come west, it seemed like a sign. Dermott poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. Fairplay does need teachers. The town has been growing steadily with the mining. Families are settling in. There is a small schoolhouse, but I believe the last teacher left to get married. Victoria sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. Tell me about the town. What is it like? Rough around the edges, like most mining towns, but not as wild as some. The law is reasonably well established. Marshal Hendricks runs a tight ship. The mines are producing well enough to keep everyone optimistic. Dermott sat down in the other chair with his own cup. There is a hotel, a few stores, several saloons, a church, the usual establishments. Some good people, some less savory characters. You learn quickly who to trust and who to avoid. And you, Victoria found herself asking, are you one of the trustworthy ones? Dermott met her eyes steadily. I suppose you will have to judge that for yourself. But I will tell you this. I have 3 sisters back in Kansas, all married now with families of their own. I was raised to respect women and to offer help when it is needed. Finding you in that storm, I could not have done anything else. There was such sincerity in his voice that Victoria felt her lingering fears ease. I am grateful you found me. I truly thought I was going to die out there. The plains can be unforgiving, Dermott agreed, especially in winter. You were brave to attempt the walk, even if it was not the wisest decision. Foolish, you mean, Victoria said ruefully. Brave and foolish are often close companions. Dermott rose to check on the food cooking over the fire. I have done my share of foolish things in the name of determination. As evening settled in and the storm continued to rage outside, they ate the simple meal Dermott had prepared. Victoria found that she was ravenously hungry, the beans and pork and cornbread tasting better than any fancy meal she had eaten back east. They talked as they ate, sharing stories of their lives. Dermott spoke of his ranch, the challenges of building something from nothing, the satisfaction of watching his small herd grow year by year. Victoria told him about Philadelphia, the crowded streets and the culture, but also the sense of being trapped in a life that felt increasingly small and predetermined. I wanted more, she admitted. Not riches or fame, just something different. A life where I could make my own choices rather than following the path laid out for me. The West offers that, Dermott said. For better or worse, out here you can become whoever you choose to be. The past matters less than what you do in the present. As darkness fell completely, the small cabin became a bubble of warmth and light in the midst of the howling storm. Dermott insisted that Victoria take the bed while he would sleep on the floor near the fire. She protested, but he was adamant. "You have been through an ordeal," he said firmly. "You need proper rest. I have slept in worse conditions than a wooden floor with a good fire nearby." Exhaustion was pulling at Victoria, the warmth and food and safety combining to make her eyes heavy. She settled into the bed, which smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, and found it surprisingly comfortable. "Dermott," she called softly as he arranged blankets on the floor. "Yes, thank you for everything." She could hear the smile in his voice when he replied. "Get some sleep, Victoria. Tomorrow will be a long day of waiting out the storm." Victoria closed her eyes, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. She thought about the strange turns life could take, how a broken axle and a blizzard had led her to this moment. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, she felt oddly peaceful, safe in a way she had not felt in a very long time. When she woke the next morning, pale light filtered through the shuttered windows, and the smell of coffee filled the cabin. Victoria sat up to find Dermott already dressed and moving about quietly, trying not to disturb her. "Good morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "The storm is still blowing, though not as fierce as last night. I am afraid we will be here at least another day." Victoria nodded, pushing her hair back from her face. She suddenly realized what a sight she must be, wearing oversized men's clothing with her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Back in Philadelphia, such a situation would have been scandalous beyond measure. Here, it simply was what it was. "I hope I am not putting you out too much," she said. "You must have work that needs doing." "Nothing that cannot wait. The cattle are in the lower pastures where they have shelter. I was checking the line cabins when I found you, making sure they were stocked and secure before the worst of winter sets in." Dermott poured her a cup of coffee. "Finding you was fortunate timing. Fortunate for me, certainly." Victoria accepted the coffee gratefully. "What would you normally do trapped in a cabin during a storm?" Dermott shrugged. "Read if I have a book. Tend to gear that needs mending. Sometimes I just think. The silence of snow has a quality that allows for contemplation. You have books here, a few." Dermott gestured to a small shelf Victoria had not noticed the night before. "Nothing fancy. Some dime novels, a book of poems my sister sent me, a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe." Victoria smiled. "I love Robinson Crusoe. I must have read it a dozen times as a child." "Feel free to read it again if you like. I find I enjoy it more with each reading." Dermott began preparing breakfast, moving with the same easy competence he had shown the night before. "I never had much schooling, but I taught myself to read when I was young. Books have been good companions over the years. They settled into the day with surprising ease. After breakfast, Victoria did indeed pick up the copy of Robinson Crusoe and found herself absorbed in the familiar story. Dermott worked on repairing a bridle, the leather creaking softly as he stitched. They talked occasionally, comfortable silences stretching between conversations. Victoria found herself stealing glances at him as the morning wore on. There was something appealing about the quiet confidence he carried, the way his hands worked skillfully at his task. He was not traditionally handsome in the way of the men she had known back east, but there was an honesty to his features, a strength that went beyond the physical. "You are staring," Dermott said without looking up from his work, but there was amusement in his voice. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I apologize. I was just thinking how different you are from the men I knew in Philadelphia." "Different how?" Now Dermott did look up, his blue eyes curious. "More straightforward, I suppose. Less concerned with appearances and social niceties. You say what you mean." "Life out here does not leave much room for pretense," Dermott said. "The land and the weather do not care about your social graces. Honesty and hard work matter more than family connections or fancy manners. You miss Kansas. Your family—" Dermott set down the bridle, considering the question. "I miss my sisters sometimes, but we write letters, and I visited 2 years ago for my youngest sister's wedding. Kansas feels like someone else's life now, something I lived a long time ago. Colorado is home. I wonder if I will feel that way about Philadelphia someday," Victoria mused. "You have family there. Beyond your brother, my parents died 5 years ago within months of each other. It was just me and James after that, until he came west." Victoria traced the edge of the book with her finger. "I have friends, of course, and my church community, but no one who would truly miss me beyond a polite inquiry at Sunday service. That sounds lonely." "It was," Victoria admitted, surprised by her own honesty. There was something about the isolation of the cabin, the enforced intimacy of their situation, that made confession easy. "I think that is why I finally agreed to come west. There was nothing really holding me in Philadelphia anymore." The day passed slowly, marked by simple tasks and easy conversation. Dermott taught Victoria how to play poker using dried beans as chips, and she taught him a word game she had played with her students. They prepared meals together in the small kitchen area, finding a rhythm that felt strangely natural for two people who had been strangers just a day before. As evening approached, Victoria realized with some surprise that she was not anxious for the storm to end. The cabin felt like a world unto itself, separate from the complications and expectations that waited beyond its walls. Here, she was simply Victoria, and Dermott was simply Dermott, two people sharing space and time without the weight of society's judgment. "The wind is dying down," Dermott observed as they ate supper. "If it clears overnight, we should be able to reach Fairplay by tomorrow afternoon. The snow will be deep, but my horse is strong and the trail is not difficult in good weather." "Will your horse be able to carry both of us through deep snow?" Victoria asked, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment she felt at the thought of their time ending. "Atlas has carried heavier loads in worse conditions. He will manage." Dermott looked at her across the small table. "Your brother will be relieved to see you. I am sure he has been worried." "Yes," Victoria agreed, though she found herself wondering what James would make of the situation, of her arriving in town wearing borrowed men's clothing, having spent 2 nights alone with a stranger. Dermott seemed to read her thoughts. "There may be talk," he said carefully. "Fairplay is not a large town and people notice things. I will make sure it is clear that I was simply offering help to someone in need, that everything was proper." Will they believe that? The people whose opinions matter will. The rest can think what they like. Dermott's voice was firm. You did nothing wrong, Victoria. You survived. That is what matters. Victoria felt a rush of gratitude toward this man who seemed to understand the precarious position women occupied, the way their reputations could be destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. You are a good man, Dermott Foster. I am just a man, Dermott replied. Trying to do right when I can. That night, as Victoria lay in the bed once more, she found sleep elusive. Tomorrow they would return to civilization, to the real world with all its complexities. She would meet her brother, begin her new life in Fairplay, perhaps find work as a teacher. Normal life would resume. But she knew she would never forget these 2 days in the cabin, the strange intimacy of shared space and survival. She would not forget the way Dermott had treated her with unfailing respect, had cared for her without expectation of anything in return. Such kindness was rare, and she treasured it. The morning dawned clear and almost painfully bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Dermott rose early and went out to assess the conditions, returning with the news that travel would be difficult but possible. The snow is deep, but the sun is strong. It will help soften the drifts, he said. If we leave soon, we should reach Fairplay before dark. Victoria felt a strange reluctance as she prepared to leave. Dermott had returned her now dry clothes, and she changed back into her traveling dress, feeling constrained by the corset and layers after the freedom of borrowed pants and shirt. Dermott saddled Atlas and helped Victoria up onto the horse before swinging up behind her. The position was even more intimate than it had been during the storm, but neither of them commented on it. Atlas picked his way carefully through the deep snow, Dermott guiding him with skill born of long experience. The journey took most of the day. The landscape was transformed by snow, familiar landmarks buried under white drifts. They stopped once to rest Atlas and eat some of the provisions Dermott had packed. As they sat on a fallen log, looking out over the snow-covered plains, Victoria felt the need to speak the thoughts that had been forming in her mind. I know we have only known each other for 2 days, she began hesitantly, but I want you to know that this time has meant something to me. You made a frightening situation bearable, more than bearable. You gave me a glimpse of what Western hospitality truly means. Dermott turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. These 2 days have meant something to me as well. I live a solitary life by choice, but your company has reminded me that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. I have been lonely without quite realizing it. Perhaps we might see each other again, Victoria said, her heart beating faster. Once I am settled in Fairplay. If you come to town. I come to town regularly for supplies, Dermott said, and I would like to see you again, Victoria, very much. They looked at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Dermott stood, offering his hand to help her up. We should keep moving. Your brother will be waiting. Fairplay appeared in the distance as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The town was larger than Victoria had expected, sprawling along both sides of a main street with smaller streets branching off. Even from a distance, she could see the evidence of the mining industry. The stamp mills and processing buildings clustered near the creek. As they rode into town, people stopped to stare at them. Victoria felt self-conscious under the scrutiny, aware of how she must look, disheveled and riding astride on a horse with a strange man. Dermott seemed unconcerned, nodding politely to those they passed. Where does your brother live? Dermott asked. He wrote that he has a house on 2nd Street, near the church. Dermott guided Atlas in that direction. The houses on 2nd Street were modest but well-maintained, a respectable neighborhood. They found the address easily enough, a small frame house painted white with blue trim. Before Dermott could help her down, the front door burst open and a man came running out. Victoria. Thank God. James Graves looked older than Victoria remembered, his face tanned and weathered by mountain sun. But his eyes were the same warm brown she knew, and the relief in them was genuine. He helped her down from the horse, pulling her into a fierce hug. We heard about the stage accident. When you did not arrive and then the storm hit, I feared the worst. James held her at arm's length, looking her over. Are you all right? Are you hurt? I am fine, James. Thanks to Mr. Foster here. Victoria gestured to Dermott, who had dismounted and stood holding Atlas's reins. He found me in the storm and gave me shelter in his line cabin. James turned to Dermott, and Victoria saw him take in the scene, making his own calculations. To his credit, whatever thoughts he had did not show on his face. He extended his hand to Dermott. James Graves. I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Foster. My sister is precious to me. Dermott shook his hand firmly. Dermott Foster, I am glad I was in the right place at the right time. Your sister is a strong woman. She survived a situation that would have broken someone with less determination. Please, come inside, James said. Let me offer you a meal at least and a drink to warm you after the cold ride. Dermott hesitated, glancing at Victoria. She gave him a small nod, wanting him to stay, not ready for him to disappear from her life just yet. I would appreciate that, Dermott said. Inside, the house was cozy and surprisingly well furnished. A woman appeared from the back room, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 30, with kind eyes and auburn hair pinned up in a practical style. Victoria, this is Margaret Chen, my housekeeper and friend, James said. Margaret, my sister, has finally arrived, though by a more adventurous route than planned. Margaret smiled warmly. I am so glad you are safe, Miss Graves. Your brother has been beside himself with worry. Let me get you some tea, and Mr. Foster as well. As they settled in the small parlor, Victoria found herself telling the story of the past few days. James listened intently, his expression growing more concerned as she described nearly freezing to death before Dermott found her. You are lucky to be alive, James said seriously when she finished. And we are fortunate that Mr. Foster is a man of honor. Please, call me Dermott. And I only did what anyone would do. Not anyone, James replied. There are men who would have taken advantage of such a situation. That you did not speaks well of your character. Margaret returned with tea and began laying out food for an impromptu meal. As they ate, the conversation turned to more general topics. James explained the mining situation in Fairplay, the strikes that had been made and the ones still hoped for. Margaret shared news about the town, who had arrived and who had left, the small dramas that made up community life. Victoria noticed the way James and Margaret interacted, the easy familiarity and small gestures of affection. She wondered if their relationship was more than employer and employee, but did not ask. Such questions could wait for when they were alone. Dermott spoke little, content to listen and observe. But Victoria was aware of him constantly, his presence a steady comfort in the strange new environment. When he finally rose to leave, claiming he needed to return to his ranch before full darkness fell, she felt a pang of loss. Thank you again for everything, she said as she walked him to the door. James and Margaret had discreetly remained in the parlor. It was my pleasure, truly. Dermott put his hat back on, adjusting it carefully. Will you be all right here? Yes, James clearly has things well in hand. And Margaret seems lovely. She is good people. Her late husband was Chinese, and she has faced more than her share of prejudice because of it, but she is strong and respected by those who matter. Dermott paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. I meant what I said earlier. I would like to see you again. May I call on you? Victoria felt her heart lift. I would like that very much. Saturday, then. I could take you riding, show you more of the area if the weather holds. Saturday would be perfect. Dermott smiled, that rare expression that transformed his whole face. He tipped his hat to her and headed out into the evening. Victoria watched him ride away, feeling both happy and melancholy at once. When she returned to the parlor, James gave her a searching look. He seems like a good man. He is. And you like him. It was not a question, and Victoria saw no point in denying it. Yes, I do, James nodded slowly. I know it is not my place to tell you how to live your life, Victoria. You are a grown woman who has crossed half a country to start fresh. But I would be remiss as your brother if I did not urge caution. Dermott Foster has a good reputation from what I have heard, but you barely know him. I know he saved my life and treated me with nothing but respect for 2 days when he could have done otherwise, Victoria replied. I know he is kind and intelligent and honest. Is that not more than many women know about the men they marry after months of supervised courtship? She has a point, Margaret interjected quietly. Sometimes you learn more about a person's true character in a crisis than you ever would in normal circumstances. James sighed. You are both probably right. I just worry. You are my only sister, Victoria. Victoria went to him and kissed his cheek. I know, and I love you for it. But trust me to make my own choices. I have been doing it for a while now. The next few days passed in a blur of settling in. James's house was small, but there was a spare bedroom that he turned over to Victoria. She learned that Margaret did indeed live in the house, occupying a small room off the kitchen, and that while James and Margaret had not formalized any relationship, there was clear affection between them. After Martha died, I thought I would never want companionship again, Margaret confided to Victoria one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. But James is a good man, patient and kind. We are finding our way towards something, though we both carry grief and take things slowly. How long has it been since you lost your husband? Victoria asked gently. 3 years. He died in a mining accident. We had only been married 2 years. Margaret's hand stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. David was everything to me. When he died, I thought my life was over. But somehow you go on. You find new purposes, new reasons to keep living. Victoria reached over and squeezed Margaret's hand, feeling a kinship with this woman who had also known loss and was building a new life from the pieces. On Thursday, Victoria visited the schoolhouse with James. It was a simple structure, one large room with a wood stove and rows of benches. The previous teacher had left behind some books and slates, but supplies were clearly limited. The school board, consisting of 3 town merchants and the minister, interviewed Victoria that afternoon. They seemed impressed by her credentials and experience, and by the end of the meeting, she had been offered the position starting after the new year. That gives you time to settle in and prepare, said Mr. Henderson, the owner of the general store. And to get through the holidays with your brother. Victoria accepted gratefully, feeling a sense of purpose settling over her. She would have work, would have a place in this community. The West was becoming real in a way it had not been before. Saturday arrived bright and cold. Victoria dressed carefully in her riding habit, one of the few practical garments she had brought from Philadelphia. She felt nervous in a way she had not experienced since she was a girl preparing for her first dance. Dermott arrived promptly at 10 in the morning, leading a gentle mare alongside Atlas. James invited him in for coffee, and the 2 men talked about ranching and mining while Victoria finished preparing. She could hear their voices from her room, James asking questions about the land and the cattle business. Dermott answering with his characteristic directness. When Victoria emerged, Dermott stood, his eyes appreciating her appearance in a way that made her blush. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you, and thank you for bringing a horse for me. I was not sure how we would manage. This is Sage. She belongs to my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who was happy to lend her when I explained the situation." Dermott helped Victoria with her coat. "She is gentle and sure-footed, perfect for a ride in winter conditions." They headed out of town toward the south, following a trail that wound through pine forests and open meadows. The snow had settled in the week since the storm, the landscape beautiful in its winter dress. Dermott pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the land and the people who had lived here before the miners came. "This was Ute territory," he explained as they paused at a viewpoint overlooking a valley. "They were forced out onto reservations about 8 years ago. Many of the place names around here are Ute words or corrupted versions of them." "Do you ever see them?" Victoria asked. "Occasionally. There are some who come back to hunt in the high country during summer, though it is illegal now. I leave them alone." This was their land long before it was anyone else's. Dermott's voice held a note of sadness. "The government makes treaties and breaks them. It is one of the injustices of the West that people back east do not see." Victoria appreciated his honesty about such matters. Many men would have glossed over the darker aspects of Western expansion, but Dermott seemed to see things clearly. They rode for several hours, talking easily about everything and nothing. Dermott told her about his ranch, the plans he had for expanding his herd, the dream of one day having a large enough operation to hire help and perhaps even build a proper ranch house. "Right now, I live in a cabin not much larger than the one where you stayed during the storm," he admitted. "It suits me, but it is not much to offer anyone else." Victoria heard the implication in his words, the suggestion of a future that included someone else. Her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice light. "I have lived in mansions in Philadelphia and slept in a line cabin during a blizzard. I can tell you which felt more like home." Dermott turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "Can you really see yourself living this kind of life? It is hard, Victoria, beautiful but hard. The winters are brutal, the summers can be blistering. Isolation is a constant companion." "It is nothing like Philadelphia." "I know that," Victoria replied. "I am not naive about the challenges, but I am also not afraid of hard work, and I have discovered that I prefer honest struggle to comfortable emptiness." They had stopped their horses on a rise overlooking Dermott's ranch. Victoria could see the cabin in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney, and the cattle dotting the snowy pastures beyond. "I need to be honest with you," Dermott said, his voice serious. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since we left the line cabin. These past few days you have been on my mind constantly. I know it is too soon, that we barely know each other in many ways, but I also know that what I feel is real." Victoria's breath caught. "I feel the same way. It is strange and probably foolish, but I cannot deny it." Dermott reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "I am not a man of fortune. I can offer you hard work and a simple life, but I can also offer you loyalty, respect, and a love that I believe will only grow stronger with time. I would be honored if you would allow me to court you properly, Victoria Graves." "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "I would like that very much." They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped, looking at each other with something like wonder. Then Dermott smiled, and Victoria smiled back, and the world felt full of possibility. The winter passed in a blur of new experiences and growing affection. Dermott came to town every Saturday without fail, and they spent long hours together, sometimes riding, sometimes just walking through Fairplay's streets, talking about everything under the sun. Victoria started teaching in January, finding joy in working with the mixed group of children from mining families and ranch families alike. James and Margaret watched the developing relationship with approval. Margaret became a good friend to Victoria, the two women spending evenings together while James worked on his mining interests. In February, James proposed to Margaret, and she accepted with tears of happiness. "I never thought I would marry again," Margaret told Victoria as they planned a simple wedding. "But James has shown me that it is possible to love more than once, that honoring the past does not mean refusing the future." The wedding took place in March, a small ceremony in the church with Victoria and Dermott among the witnesses. Watching her brother and his bride exchange vows, Victoria felt a deep sense of rightness. James had found happiness again, and so, she believed, had she. Dermott had been courting her for 5 months, and Victoria knew without doubt that she loved him. He had proven himself in countless small ways, through his consistency and his kindness, through the respect he showed her independence even as he made clear his devotion. He met her as an equal, valued her opinions, and made her laugh with his dry humor. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch of James's house watching the sun set over the mountains, Dermott turned to Victoria with an expression that made her heart race. "I have something to ask you," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I have been working hard all winter on the ranch, getting things ready. I have expanded the cabin, added 2 rooms and a proper kitchen. It is still not grand, but it is a home, a place where a family could grow." Victoria could barely breathe as she waited for what she knew was coming. "Victoria Graves, I love you more than I thought it possible to love another person. You have brought light into my life, purpose beyond simple survival. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, face whatever challenges come together." Dermott pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Victoria whispered, then louder, "Yes, Dermott. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she saw that his hands were shaking slightly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Victoria felt as though she had come home at last. They married in June, when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadows and the aspens were bright green with new growth. It was a small wedding, attended by James and Margaret, a few of Dermott's ranching friends and some of Victoria's students and their families. Mrs. Patterson, Dermott's neighbor who had lent Victoria the horse, cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. Afterward, Dermott brought Victoria to their home. She had seen it before, had helped him hang curtains and arrange furniture, but entering it as his wife felt different, momentous. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," Dermott said, carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now theirs, Dermott held Victoria close and spoke softly into the darkness. "I keep thinking about that storm," he said. "How easily I might have taken a different path, missed you entirely. You would have died, and I would never have known what I was missing." Victoria pressed closer to him, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "But that is not what happened. You found me. You saved me. And now we have this." "Now we have this," Dermott agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And I promise you, Victoria, I will spend every day making sure you never regret trusting me that day in the storm." "I already know I will not," Victoria replied. "You have given me more than shelter from a storm, Dermott. You have given me a life worth living." The first year of their marriage was filled with adjustments and joy in equal measure. Victoria continued teaching through the fall, riding into Fairplay 3 days a week on Sage, whom Dermott had purchased from Mrs. Patterson as a wedding gift. The other days she spent at the ranch, learning the rhythms of the work, helping Dermott with the endless tasks that came with running a cattle operation. It was harder than she had imagined, but also more satisfying. There was something deeply rewarding about physical labor, about seeing the direct results of her efforts. She learned to milk the cow Dermott had acquired, to tend the chickens, to preserve food for the winter. Her hands, once soft and suited only to holding books and pens, became capable of harder tasks. Dermott was an excellent teacher, patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded. He never made her feel inadequate or foolish, never suggested that she should be other than she was. In turn, Victoria brought her own skills to their partnership. She kept meticulous records of the ranch accounts, wrote letters to potential buyers for their cattle, and transformed the cabin into a true home with small touches of beauty and comfort. In the spring of their second year together, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a mixture of joy and fear. Childbirth was dangerous, especially in the isolated conditions of the ranch, but Dermott's happiness was so evident, his excitement so genuine, that Victoria's fears diminished. "We will get through this together," he assured her, holding her close. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As her pregnancy progressed, Dermott became almost comically protective. He insisted she reduce her teaching to just 1 day a week, and he hired a young man from town, Peter Smithson, to help with the heavier ranch work so that he could be closer to home. Victoria found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one day when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "I know that, but you are carrying our child, and I will not take any chances with either of you." Dermott took the laundry basket from her firmly. "Humor me, please." Victoria relented, recognizing that his protectiveness came from love, not a desire to control. Besides, as her pregnancy advanced, she found herself tiring more easily and was grateful for the help. James and Margaret visited often, and Margaret shared her knowledge of herbs and remedies that could ease pregnancy discomforts. The two couples had grown close, bound by family ties and genuine friendship. James's mining claim had proven profitable, and he was considering buying into a stamp mill partnership. Life was good for all of them. In October, on a crisp autumn morning, Victoria went into labor. Dermott had arranged for Margaret and Mrs. Patterson to be present, and he sent Peter racing into town to fetch the doctor. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Victoria thought she might not survive. But Dermott never left her side, holding her hand through the worst of the pain, his presence a steady anchor. When their son was born, red-faced and wailing with healthy lungs, Dermott cried openly. "A boy," he whispered, looking down at the tiny life they had created. "We have a son." They named him Samuel after Dermott's father. Samuel Foster came into the world surrounded by love, in a small ranch cabin in the Colorado mountains, and Victoria thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than her husband holding their baby with such wonder and tenderness. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew from a baby into a curious toddler and then a bright, energetic boy. Victoria taught him his letters and numbers, while Dermott taught him about the land and the animals. The ranch prospered steadily, allowing them to build a larger house, a proper barn, and to expand their herd significantly. When Samuel was 3, Victoria became pregnant again. This time, having been through it once, she was less frightened. Their daughter, Ellen, was born on a snowy February day, her arrival easier than her brother's had been. She had Dermott's blue eyes and Victoria's dark hair, and from the start, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. James and Margaret had children too, two daughters who were playmates for Samuel and Ellen. The families gathered often, celebrating holidays and birthdays, supporting each other through the challenges that came with life on the frontier. Victoria never did return to teaching in the formal schoolhouse, but she took on students in the summer months, teaching children from neighboring ranches who otherwise would have no education. She also started a lending library in Fairplay, collecting books from back east and making them available to anyone who wanted to read. It was her way of bringing culture and learning to the growing community. Dermott served on the town council for several years, helping to make decisions about Fairplay's future. He argued passionately for schools and infrastructure, for treating the Chinese miners who lived in a camp outside of town with fairness and respect. He became known as a voice of reason and integrity, someone whose word could be trusted. 10 years after that winter storm had brought them together, Victoria and Dermott stood together on the porch of their home, watching Samuel and Ellen play in the yard with their cousins. The ranch had grown beyond what either of them had imagined, with several hired hands helping to manage over 200 head of cattle. "You ever think about Philadelphia?" Dermott asked, his arm around Victoria's waist. Victoria leaned into him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "Rarely. And when I do, it feels like remembering someone else's life. This is my life, here with you and our children." "Any regrets?" Victoria thought about the question seriously, as she always did with Dermott. "I regret nothing. Every choice I made, every step that led me to you was worth it." "Even nearly freezing to death in a blizzard," Dermott laughed, the sound warm and rich. "Well, I am grateful for that blizzard. It brought me the greatest gift I could have asked for." "What is that?" "You." Dermott turned her to face him, his blue eyes still as striking as they had been that first day when he emerged from the storm like salvation. "You, Victoria Foster. Your love, your partnership, the family we have built, all of it. You made my life complete in ways I did not know were possible." Victoria reached up to cup his face, feeling the weathered texture of his skin, the solid reality of him. "I love you, Dermott. Then, now, always." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of a decade together and the promise of all the years still to come. The children called for them, and they broke apart laughing. Ellen wanted to show them a butterfly she had caught, and Samuel was insisting that his father promised to teach him to rope today. Life called them forward, full of small moments and daily joys, the beautiful ordinariness of a life built on love and trust. As the years continued to pass, Victoria and Dermott faced challenges as all couples do. There were droughts that threatened the herd, illnesses that frightened them, disagreements that required patience and compromise to resolve. But they had learned early in their relationship to communicate honestly, to face problems together rather than apart, and that foundation served them well. Samuel grew into a fine young man, serious and responsible like his father, but with his mother's love of learning. At 20, he went east to study agriculture and animal husbandry, planning to bring modern ranching techniques back to Colorado. Ellen, at 17, was teaching at the Fairplay school that Victoria had once taught at, beloved by her students for her energy and creativity. James and Margaret's daughters married and started families of their own. James eventually sold his mining interests and bought a mercantile in town, content to leave the risks and rewards of mining behind. He and Margaret grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. The West changed around them all. Fairplay grew from a rough mining town into a more settled community. The railroad came through in the early 1890s, connecting them more easily to Denver and beyond. But the essential character of the place remained, that spirit of independence and possibility that had drawn them all there in the first place. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dermott surprised Victoria with a trip to Denver. They stayed in a fine hotel, went to the theater, dined in elegant restaurants. It was a glimpse back into the kind of life Victoria had left behind. "Are you tempted?" Dermott asked as they walked through Denver's streets, so different from Fairplay's dusty roads. By all this culture and sophistication, Victoria looked around at the electric lights, the fashionable people, the stores full of goods from around the world. It was impressive, certainly, but it did not call to her heart. "It is nice to visit," she said honestly, "but I am ready to go home. Home to our ranch, our life." Dermott smiled, that smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Good, because I am ready to go home too. I missed the mountains the moment we left them." They returned to Fairplay the next day, and Victoria felt her spirits lift as the familiar peaks came into view. This was where she belonged, where she had built a life of meaning and purpose. The girl from Philadelphia, who had nearly frozen in a blizzard, seemed like a distant memory, someone she barely recognized. Samuel returned from his studies and began implementing new practices on the ranch, improving their breeding program and increasing their profits. He courted and married a doctor's daughter from Leadville, a practical young woman named Alice who fit seamlessly into their family. Ellen continued teaching until she fell in love with a young mining engineer, and after their wedding, she moved to Breckenridge where he had taken a position managing a mine. Victoria and Dermott became grandparents multiple times over, their home filled with the sound of young voices during holidays and visits. They loved watching their grandchildren explore the same land their own children had, teaching them about the plants and animals, telling them stories of the old days. "We are getting old," Dermott observed one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. He was 60 now, his dark hair gone gray, his face deeply lined by sun and weather. But his blue eyes were as clear as ever, and his love for Victoria burned as strong as it had in their youth. "We are," Victoria agreed. She was 53, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands marked by years of work. But she felt no regret for the passage of time. Every line on her face, every ache in her bones was evidence of a life fully lived. "You remember that day I found you in the storm?" Dermott asked. "Every detail," Victoria replied. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not know I was praying." "I remember thinking how small and fragile you looked," Dermott said. "How unsuited to this harsh land. I was wrong about that." "Was I suited to it, do you think? Or did I just adapt?" "Both, maybe. You had the strength in you all along, but you had to be tested to find it." Dermott reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "You are the strongest person I know, Victoria Foster." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, Samuel and Alice in their own home on the far side of the property. It was just the two of them, as it had been so many nights over the past decades. "I would do it all again," Victoria said softly. "Every moment, every challenge for this, for you." Dermott lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "And I would ride out into every storm in the world if I knew you would be waiting at the end of it." The years continued their march, as they always do. Dermott and Victoria watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated each new milestone, grieved when James passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Margaret following him just 2 years later. The loss was profound, but they comforted each other and found solace in memories of happy times. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations, as Dermott's arthritis made it harder for him to do the physical work. But Dermott still rode out most days, checking on the herd, unable to fully let go of the life he had built. Victoria continued her lending library and wrote long letters to Ellen in Breckenridge and to their various grandchildren scattered across Colorado. On a warm June day in 1912, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Samuel and Alice hosted a large party at the ranch, with family and friends coming from across the region. Victoria looked around at all the people who had become part of their lives and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to Dermott as they danced together, his movements stiffer now but his hold on her as secure as ever. "For what?" he asked. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me all these years." Dermott pulled her closer. "You saved me too, you know. I was just surviving before you came into my life. You taught me how to truly live." As the party continued around them, they held each other and swayed to the music. Two people who had been brought together by chance and fate, who had chosen each other again and again through the years, whose love had only deepened with time. More years passed, bringing more changes. The world was transforming rapidly, automobiles becoming common, airplanes taking to the skies, news traveling faster than ever before. But on the ranch in the Colorado mountains, life maintained its essential rhythms. Seasons changed, cattle were born and raised and sold. The land endured. Dermott's health began to decline in his early 70s. His heart, the doctors said, weakened by decades of hard physical labor at high altitude. Victoria nursed him tenderly, refusing to leave his side even when Samuel begged her to rest. "I will rest when he is well," she insisted, though in her heart she feared he would not get well. On a clear autumn morning, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides and the first snow dusting the highest peaks, Dermott called Victoria to his bedside. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were lucid. "I need you to promise me something," he said, his voice weak but determined. "Anything," Victoria replied, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me you will not give up on life when I am gone. You have so much left to give, so many people who need you. Our children, our grandchildren, the community. Promise me you will keep living fully." "I promise," Victoria whispered, though the thought of life without him seemed impossible to bear. "And know this," Dermott continued, using what strength he had left to hold her hand tightly. "Loving you was the greatest privilege of my life. If I could choose my life again, knowing how it would end, I would not change a single thing. You were and are and always will be my greatest blessing." "And you are mine," Victoria said through her tears. "My love, my partner, my home." Dermott smiled, that beautiful smile she had fallen in love with decades ago. "I will be waiting for you," he said. "When it is your time, I will be there, just like I was in the storm. I will always find you, Victoria." He closed his eyes then, and Victoria held him as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. She sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face, saying goodbye to the man who had been her world for over 30 years. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. For weeks, Victoria moved through life mechanically, going through the motions but feeling hollow inside. Samuel and Alice were wonderful, supporting her while managing the ranch and their own grief. Ellen came from Breckenridge and stayed for a month, her presence a comfort. But eventually, Victoria remembered her promise. She remembered all the things Dermott had taught her about strength and resilience. She began to engage with life again, slowly at first, but with growing determination. She increased her work with the lending library, expanding it into a small actual library building that Samuel helped fund. She organized community gatherings, taught reading to adults who had never learned, became a mentor to young women in Fairplay who sought her advice. She traveled to visit Ellen and her family, to see Samuel and Alice's children, The years without Dermott were not easy, but they were not empty either. Victoria discovered that love did not end with death, that the lessons and strength gained from a good marriage continued to sustain her. She kept his memory alive through stories told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the way she lived her life with the courage and integrity he had valued. On a spring morning in 1925, Victoria Graves Foster passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. She was surrounded by family in the ranch house that she and Dermott had built together, the home that had sheltered 3 generations of their family. At her funeral, Samuel stood before the assembled crowd and spoke of his mother's remarkable life. He told the story of how his parents met, how a winter storm and a chance encounter had led to a love that shaped not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. "My father always said that finding my mother in that blizzard was the luckiest day of his life," Samuel concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think they were both lucky. Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have had the courage to choose love, lucky to have built a life of such depth and meaning. They showed all of us what true partnership looks like, what it means to face life's challenges together. That legacy lives on in all of us." Victoria was buried next to Dermott on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The marker was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription that Samuel had chosen: 2 lives made one by love and trust. The ranch continued for many years under Samuel's stewardship, and then his sons, remaining in the Foster family for generations. The library Victoria founded still stands in Fairplay, now named the Foster Memorial Library in honor of both Victoria and Dermott. Their story became part of the town's history, told and retold as an example of frontier courage and enduring love. But perhaps the greatest legacy Victoria and Dermott left was something less tangible. They showed that love could bloom in the harshest conditions, that trust once given and honored could become the foundation for an entire life. They proved that sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best outcomes, that being forced to rely on a stranger could result in finding your soulmate. The winter storm that nearly killed Victoria Graves instead gave her life. Dermott Foster, the cowboy who found her and sheltered her, made sure that she never regretted trusting him that desperate day. Together, they built something beautiful and lasting, a love that weathered every storm and only grew stronger with time. Their great-grandchildren, playing in the meadows of the Foster Ranch on summer days, sometimes stumbled upon the old line cabin where their ancestors had first taken shelter together. It still stood, maintained by the family as a kind of shrine to that fateful meeting. They would peek inside at the simple interior and try to imagine their great-grandfather carrying their great-grandmother across that threshold, saving her life, and though neither knew it then, beginning a love story for the ages. And on winter evenings, when storms blew down from the peaks and the wind howled around the ranch house, the Foster family would gather close and tell the story again. The story of Victoria and Dermott, of a storm and a stranger, of trust and love and a life built together in the Wild West. It was a story that never grew old, because it reminded them all of something fundamentally true. That love, when it is real and chosen and nurtured, can overcome anything. That 2 people, thrown together by chance, can create something purposeful and beautiful that echoes down through generations. And so the story lived on, as the best love stories always do, inspiring and comforting, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest adventures and the deepest loves come when we are brave enough to trust, to take a leap into the unknown, to say yes when circumstances ask us to be bold. Victoria and Dermott's love story began with a winter storm and a desperate need, but it bloomed into something eternal, something that would never be forgotten as long as there were Fosters in the Colorado mountains, as long as there was a library bearing their name, as long as there were people who believed in the transformative power of love. The winter storm had forced Victoria to trust a stranger. The cowboy, true to his nature and his heart, had made absolutely certain she never regretted it for a single day of her long and happy life.